Chris, what is your position on Citizens United, and how much does big money hurt our democracy?
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about why we're in this mess right now on the budget, I would trace a lot of it back to the way that campaigns are funded. I think the biggest scourge on democracy today is the fact that a lot of good people don't run for office because they have to go out there and raise $10 million to run for the United States Senate. That's what I did. I spent 2 years raising money, spending 4, 5, 6 hours a day on the phone, calling up friends and strangers, asking them for money. And in my case, you know, my opponent could just write herself a check. And so, in her case, it didn't necessarily overcome other liabilities, but that's what's happening out there, right? It's more people who are self-funding are running because that's just the easier way to run, is to just write yourself a big check. And now you have these, because of the Citizens United decision, which is a decision that basically says that any entity out there, a corporation or an individual, can spend unlimited amounts of money arguing for or against candidates. You now have, outside of these self-funders, massive corporations and massive millionaire and billionaire operations spending money in these campaigns. And it's terrible. It's terrible. And here's a specific example of why the way that we raise money today is so bad. So when I send out a fundraising email, and I say something, I say, give me money because I've done something good, it raises 1/3 that an email that I send out saying, give me money because the other side has done something bad, right? You can always raise more money, and frankly, you can always generate more support by talking about how the other side is bad rather than talking about how you're good. It's in essence, it's playing to human nature. We are drawn more to sort of oppositional politics than we are to politics of support. And so what happens is that after each election is done, because you have to go right back to raising money, the two sides start digging trenches again and start immediately pointing fingers and talking about how bad the other side is, because that's how they raise money. And if they don't do it, the other side will do it. And so this sort of obsession with money in politics in part drives the dysfunction, because we fight more because that's what helps to raise money. And then if you really fight more than anybody else, if you're the guy who screams louder, you raise way more money than anybody else, right? I mean, when Joe Wilson stood up at the State of the Union speech and shouted, "You lie," at the President of the United States, he raised, I think, $2 million in the 2 days after. And so that becomes a really perverse incentive for people to just stand up and say outrageous things, because it will raise them more money and help them get reelected. And so if you publicly financed elections at the federal level, which is what I'd like to do, as we do in Connecticut, you'd solve a lot of problems. But one of the biggest ones that you'd solve is you would stop politics from being so adversarial, because there would be one big incentive for adversarial politics removed.
So we'll take one from Twitter. Scott Bartleson asks, which senators will you reach across the aisle to work with?
Yeah, that was a great question. And so, you know, in the Senate, listen, I'm learning the Senate, and in the Senate there is, thankfully, a much sort of longer tradition and better tradition of reaching out across the aisle to work with senators. In the House, it was hard to do. In the House of Representatives, I ran a group called the Center Aisle Caucus, and the Center Aisle Caucus was a group that we ran specifically designed to get Republicans and Democrats talking to each other. And so it was, we'd meet every month with Republicans and Democrats to try to find areas of agreement. And one of our rules in the Center Aisle Caucus was that if you were a Democrat, you had to bring a Republican with you to join the group, and if you were a Republican, you had to bring a Democrat, so that we always had equal numbers. Our group didn't have a lot of members. And actually, it was all right. We actually had, that's not true. We had like about 40 members or so by the time that I left the House of Representatives. But there's no more Center Aisle Caucus, because the 4 chairs of the caucus all left. I left to run for the Senate, and the other 3 members left Congress. One because he got primaried from the left in a Democratic primary because he was too centrist, and he got primaried from the left. The other 2, the 2 Republicans, left because they were kind of centrist Republicans, and they were sick and tired of doing battle with the right wing of the Republican House caucus, and they just left out of frustration. And so there's no Center Aisle Caucus left in the House of Representatives. So what senators will I reach out to? Well, I've been talking to Senator Collins of Maine on a lot of these gun issues and school safety issues. She's interested in the issue of background checks, and she's also interested in the issue of school safety. I sat down, I don't think I'm violating a confidence now, but I'm sitting down with all of the Republican freshman members, who tend to be the most conservative members, to try to find places that we can work on. So Tim Scott, who's a very, very conservative member from South Carolina, and I sat down just the other day to try to find some areas that we can work on. We're looking at issues of education, where we might have some areas of agreement. Mark Kirk, who's a Republican from Illinois, is a guy who cares a lot about manufacturing. I care a lot about manufacturing. And so I'm hopeful to work with him on trying to revitalize manufacturing, both in the Midwest here and in Connecticut. But I'm going to be really aggressive in reaching out to Republicans, and hopefully everything that I do in the Senate will be done with Republicans. Nothing can happen without them, right? I mean, talk about immigration, no way to pass an immigration bill without Republicans, no way to pass a gun violence bill without Republicans, no way to avoid sequestration without Republicans. So in the Senate, more so in the House you can just get a majority vote and something's done. In the Senate, because you have the 60-vote majority requirement, you have to reach out and get members of the other party to support you. And I did a lot of that in the House of Representatives when I was the chair of the Senator caucus, and I want to do that in the Senate as well.
Brian from Southington asks, what evidence do you